So when you think about what constitutes the necessary skill set for human living, what comes to mind? Maybe the ability to make fire, to procure natural resources, build or access shelter. What about personality traits? What would you consider most important there? Adaptability, resourcefulness, creativity. I watch a lot of survival shows, so we talk about this in our home all the time. What about kindness? Where would that fall on the list when it comes to our survival? Given the influence of the idea of survival of the fittest in how we think of evolution, it's unlikely that most of us would place kindness high up there on our lists. As an advanced state of being, sure, kindness has its place, but as a requisite for the continuity of our days, surely other traits are more valuable. But a closer look at evolutionary theory reveals just the opposite. As you may know, the theory of social Darwinism, which brought this notion of survival of the fittest into the mainstream, was not actually the work of Darwin at all, but rather of Herbert Spencer. He was a pretty bitter guy, if you ever go back and study this stuff. Darwin, though, spoke of something entirely different, noting that communities, which included the greatest number of the most sympathetic members, those communities would flourish best and rear the greatest number of offspring. From a true Darwinian mindset, without kindness, the survival and flourishing not just of individual people, but of any group of people, no less our species, could be in question. Interestingly enough, the foundations of our particular Jewish narrative make the exact same conclusion, establishing early on the primacy of kindness, of what we call chesed, from the very beginning of the Jewish story, tying it, kindness, to the very definition of what it means to be a Jew. Consider first Abraham, associated in Torah and later Jewish literature as the exemplar of chesed, kindness. Not only does Abraham extend help and support to those in need, but he is also quick to do so. He doesn't wait around to be asked. But consider as well the second generation of Jewish families, not through Isaac, who gets all the airtime, but rather through Rebekah, whose legacy is just as powerful in continuing that very same kindness that Abraham displays. Very much in the same way that her uncle and her eventual father-in-law does it, Rebekah hurries to care for those in need. In her case, as described in this week's Torah portion, offering kindness to both humans and animals alike. And like Abraham, she doesn't ask what she can do to help, she just does it. And not the bare minimum, she goes out of her way to go above and beyond, at one point volunteering to water a guy named Eliezer's camels. Now, we don't usually talk about the watering of camels and likely can't relate to this in our modern lives, but here's a camel fun fact. A single camel would require 25 gallons of water after having journeyed through the desert, and Eliezer has no less than 10 camels with him, according to the Torah portion. So Rebekah goes out to get 250 gallons of water. Campers out there, have you ever schlepped a 1-gallon jug of water? It's quite difficult. A 5-gallon jug of water, nearly unbearable, I've got to say. And I'm not so much of a camper. I like to watch on television, but not do it myself. But here we see Rebekah rushing, hurrying to be kind to a stranger in something that would have exerted her to the maximum of her physical capabilities and likely taken hours and hours of her time. One Hasidic commentator puts it this way: Eliezer wanted to test Rebekah as to whether or not she was a practitioner of loving kindness. For only if this were to be the case would she be fitting to enter the house of Abraham. The authentic sign of loving kindness is one that runs after the unfortunate to help them. And if such an individual should come on their own, one goes beyond their immediate request in order to truly provide for their needs. This model of kindness was not just about politeness, which we often mistake for kindness in our community. This was about more than common civility. It demanded something exponentially greater. And ultimately, it's this legacy of kindness that comes to be a defining characteristic of what it means to be a Jew. Sure, the performance of mitzvot and commandments count. The observance of Jewish tradition counts. Jewish culture counts. But when it comes down to it, there is actually an inventoried list of the defining qualities of the Jewish people. And this isn't a modern list, it's not a reform list, it's a list that's given in the Talmud. When it repeats what King David teaches, there are 3 distinguishing characteristics of the Jewish people. They are mercy, humility, and kindness. Think about that for a moment when we think about what it means to be Jewish. A different Hasidic teacher of mine puts it this way: any day in which we do not perform some act of kindness is a day in which we have not really lived. I wonder what would happen if the same kindness litmus test were administered to each of us, the descendants of the house and legacy of Abraham and Rebekah today. When it comes to how kind we are, the extent we're willing to go for the sake of kindness, how many of us would pass this test? These days in which bombast, cruelty, indignation, these are elevated above all else. Our self-righteous Yelp reviews. You don't need to look far to see the news encounters of cruelty in all ordinary circumstances, to see that kindness isn't a virtue that finds itself widespread and practiced. So I'd like to suggest that each of us who understands ourself as a part of a Jewish family or inspired by Jewish tradition come to take most seriously the call to live this legacy of this particular form of kindness that requires going beyond sending a text message with heart emojis, the kind of kindness that invites real giving, real sacrifice. What would that even look like for us? Here's 2 possibilities just to get us thinking. If we know that someone is struggling, instead of asking them, "How are you?" and letting them know, "I'm here for you, just call me if you need me," we can instead decide, "I'm gonna make them a meal now, and I will bring it and drop it off at their home." Or maybe I'll do even more and make extra food that they can freeze and have later. Even if they say, "No, don't worry about it, I'm fine." Or what about when our patience is really put to the test and we're confronted by someone with something that pushes our buttons, causes us to take umbrage, or even infuriates us? We can follow the advice of the Mishnah from over 1,800 years ago and make the choice that when we find ourselves assessing someone with negative judgment, that we can instead tip the balance in their favor, giving them the benefit of the doubt, not assuming anything about them. Instead, we can teach ourselves to assume something better, something kinder. And then we can be cordial, but we can also be curious and exert the energy, and you better believe it's energy, required to actually be kind, authentically kind, even in the face of adversity. This idea, I think, isn't an easy one. And I think too often we short our own capacity, though, to enact kindness because we assume, well, kindness is an optional thing. It's a bonus quality, as it were. It doesn't ultimately impact the quality of our lives, no less our physical existence. We make that wrong assumption, and it's a critical mistake. And our ancients, they understood what modern sociologists and psychologists now have through extensive research, that practicing kindness proves a critical ensurer of our physical and mental health and overall well-being. Connecting with others through kindness, real kindness, helps us enjoy better mental and physical health. It actually speeds up recovery from disease, and it may even lengthen our lifespan. That's not Darwinian research. That's 21st century research. Turns out it's not just the quality of our lives that kindness impacts alone, but the existence of our lives as well. And there's more. The same research observes that the more kind we act from one situation to the next, the more likely we are to rewire our souls toward kindness. And the more kind we act, the more kind others act in return, because kindness is contagious. Do you know they're studying the effect of the show Ted Lasso? Any of you watch Ted Lasso? Raise your hand if you do. If you don't and you want to feel good, you should watch this show. They're studying the impact that it has on people's behavior just from watching a television show whose entire theme is built around simple acts of kindness. And they're seeing that the people who watch it are more likely to perform acts of kindness themselves in short proximity to when they've watched the television show, because kindness is contagious. We have to remember that our kindness is simply a reflection of the condition of our own selves. It shows the fitness of our own souls. And here's what we know about souls. Just like our bodies, they are nurtured and reflect what we feed them. If offered anger and entitlement, our souls become angry and entitled. If offered apathy and indifference, our souls become apathetic and indifferent. But if offered compassion and kindness, our souls become compassionate and kind, literally. Any day in which we do not perform some act of kindness is a day in which we have not really lived. These are the choices. Shabbat Shalom.